my name is Kristin and this is Kristin Kraves Book. So this is my favorite video to film and it's my favorite video to watch. I just love gushing about books. I love seeing other people gush about books. It really does damage to my TBR, but it's so much fun. So I'm just excited to jump right into this and tell you my top 12 favorite books of the year, because I tried to narrow it down to 10 and it was impossible. There are more that I could talk about. It's hard for me not even to do honorable mentions right now, like Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley didn't make it, but it's so close. Or the sequel to A Song for the Wild Built, A Prayer for the Crown Shy didn't make it. So there's me sneaking in some honorable mentions without really saying they're honorable mentions. But let's get into my top 12 books of 2022. And I do want to mention I tried to do this in some kind of order. The top 2 are really my top 2. But other than that, I mean, it was hard for me to really place them. But this is my attempt at that. So in 12th place, I have Honey and Spice by Balu Babaloba, and this is one of the best romances that I read this year. Arguably the best audiobook that I listened to. I really like the audiobook of this one because our main character has a radio show. She is in college, it's set at a college, and she has like a student-based radio show where she gives advice, and a lot of it's dating advice, and she comes off as very like abrasive and sarcastic, but you get to know her past and you see like the insecurities and where that comes from. So I really appreciate a romance where we get to know the characters so deeply, and she ends up in this fake dating relationship with somebody that she bashed on her show because she's seen like kissing him at a party or something, and this is going to ruin her reputation because she's trashed this guy. Now she's dating him or she's kissing him, so they have to make it seem like it's more serious than it is, and of course they fall in love from there. It's really sweet. They have really strong chemistry, but there are other subplots throughout that make this one stand out to me. There is a female friendship that blooms throughout the story that I really appreciated and thought was strong. I loved this author's writing, and I've actually decided to share quotes from each of these books because I realized how much I appreciate strong writing this year. I don't know what that is. It's just atmosphere and writing are my two things just right now. I don't know. That's just what I learned things as I was putting this list together. So this is just a small quote. It's nothing deep, but I just thought it was so accurate. It says, "Sometimes beautiful things get messy. Mess is okay." And I think that is awesome. My two favorite romances this year, you'll see another one, are messy romances. I don't mind a mess. Life is messy. Romance is messy. Falling in love is messy. So I just thought everything about this was brilliant. You also get the hero in this one is doing like a class project, and he's talking about why people fall in love or how people date, to get interviews of him talking to different couples as well. It's really enlightening. I just thought everything about it was fantastic. So I have to go back and read this author's short story collection and then everything else she's gonna write in the future because I just thought this was brilliant. Highly recommend. And then 11th is one that really surprised me. If you told me when I picked this up it was gonna be on this list, I never would have believed you. And that is This Vicious Grace by Emily Thied. I was just trying to get through my Fairy Loot editions. I thought this was gonna be like a fun YA fantasy romance. Didn't think too much of it. This has stayed with me. I love this. I highly recommend this. This made me realize I like the bodyguard trope. I thought that Emily Thied did a fantastic job of finding the balance between having a romance that you can get invested in, characters you care about, a plot that's captivating, a world that's really interesting, the magic is unique. The writing was really well done. I just thought everything about this was fantastic. She just managed to balance it all in a way that was really satisfying to me personally. I love the conversations about like your bio family versus your found family. The found family in this was fantastic, and you know that that is my favorite trope of all time. The romance was really sweet and endearing, I thought, and we're really building up to more of that, but also the conflicts that are outside of the romance were so good. So we're following this character who, the tagline says, her gift can save or it can kill. So in this world she is like the savior, and she has to marry somebody who like can amplify her powers, but she's too strong. She ends up killing these people all the time. So people are scared of her. People don't want to volunteer for this position anymore, even though it's such an honor. And really the community is turning against her. There's a mutiny against her. She needs a bodyguard to protect her. And that is where the romance starts. That is where all the politics come into play. That's how the found family is formed. And I just loved it. And the ending is satisfying, but it really does leave you wanting more and sets up the sequel really well. So I cannot wait for the sequel that comes out next year. And yeah, this just really surprised me. One of my favorite YA fantasies ever, so I highly recommend this, and I can't wait to read whatever Emily Thied writes next. And the quote that I chose for that one is, "Keep your gods and goddesses on their pedestals if you want. But the rituals, the rules, the isolation, you know that isn't really from them, right? That's written by mortals, men mostly. We have a bad habit of locking up people who scare us, and the things that scare men with power most is a woman with more of it." So good. I just love that book. In 10th, surprise, surprise, Legends and Lattes. I think we're going to see this on a lot of favorites lists this year because it's really the book that made a lot of us fall in love with cozy fantasy, myself included. It is now one of my favorite fantasy subgenres. It's something that I'm craving all the time now. I have a ton of it on my TBR cart now. It's what I want to read in January, and it all is thanks to this wonderful book, Legends and Lattes. It has the tagline, everybody says this, a novel of high fantasy and low stakes, and that is what this is. You can't go into this expecting it to be an adventure or there to be a lot of twists and turns. It's nothing like that. It's following this retired orc barbarian who's opening a coffee shop in a place where nobody knows what coffee is, and it just leads to some really endearing and sweet moments. It is sapphic. There is a romance between these two, but I wouldn't go into this expecting that to be the focus. It's very much in the background. It's just really about this coffee shop, what it takes to open this coffee shop, this community falling in love with coffee and their reactions to coffee. I know it sounds kind of boring, and maybe for some that it is, but it was so delightful. This is probably the book that brought me the most joy this year. I have to say that. I really think that's true. And then, of course, everybody loves Thimble the Mouse, and I cannot wait. I know that Travis Baldree is writing another book in this world, which I think we are all dying for. And Travis Baldree is also a pretty popular audiobook narrator and does narrate his own audiobook of this, and he does a fantastic job. So I recommend that as well. And the quote that I chose for this one just sums up the vibes of this perfectly. It says, "The combined aromas of hot cinnamon, ground coffee, and sweet cardamom intoxicated her, and she brewed and smiled and served and chatted. A deep contentment welled up. It was a glowing warmth she'd never experienced before, and she liked it. She liked it a great deal." So it's just sweet. You get the vibes from that quote. That is what you can expect from Legends and Lattes. In 9th, we have The Golem and the Ginny by Helene Wecker. I think it's really Helene Wecker's writing that got to me. I think that this is the most beautifully written book that I've read this year. The amount of research that went into this, it's so obvious, and I really appreciate that we're following a golem named Hava and a Ginny named Ahmed, who are both immigrating to New York at the same time, or they end up in New York at the same time. I won't spoil how. And I learned a lot about golems and ginnies through this. So it's a sub-genre that I realized I really like, with this like historical kind of a romance with a touch of magic. I really appreciate this. And this takes place in the late 1800s, so you can tell Helene Wecker did a lot of research about what New York was like at that time, which I thought was interesting, the experience of immigrants in New York at that time. And I liked all the subplots and the side characters that we got throughout just as much as I loved the Golem and the Ginny. Their stories are just as important. So we learn about all the people within the community that the Golem and the Ginny interact with, how they are related to their lives. Then we eventually do see these two come together. And it's not really sort of a romance, it's just how they come to appreciate each other and relate to each other, because nobody else can understand them in the way, and their experiences the same way. And it's just kind of charming, but also harrowing and just beautifully written. And this is one of the most atmospheric books that I read this year. This is definitely an all-time favorite, one I can see myself returning to. And I also read the sequel this year. I don't think that's necessary, but if you love the writing, then it's worth picking up. It's just not as strong as this one. I don't think it's necessary, but highly recommend this. This is like a decade old now or more, and I think it holds up. I think it's brilliant, and I'm hoping that Helene Wecker is working on something else, because I just need to experience her writing again. And the quote for that one is, "All of us are lonely at some point or another, no matter how many people surround us. And then we meet someone who seems to understand. She smiles, and for the moment, the loneliness disappears." So you can see how it's kind of got that sweet connection between the two as well. I just really thought that was a special book. The next few I don't actually own. This one I read an e-arc of, and it wouldn't be one of my favorite books of the year list, best books of the year list, if I didn't have a Tiffany D. Jackson book on it. So of course I have The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. I think this is also a book that's on a lot of people's favorite lists this year. A lot of people have discovered Tiffany D. Jackson through this book, and it is a YA horror. This is their second, and I think it's her strongest of the two. And it's a Carrie retelling. Now, I watched Carrie the movie many years ago, never read the book, but I'm familiar with the heart of the story. I know the basics, and I think that Tiffany D. Jackson brought something really interesting to that character and that storyline. And this is following a young girl who is passing as white. Her mom is black and her dad is white, and her dad is very racist and is insisting that she hides the fact that she's mixed race. But that is exposed somehow. I'll let you find that out for yourself, and the community turns against her. Tiffany D. Jackson's books are always based on real events. So this is in a town where it's 2014 and they still have segregated proms, and that is really something that happened in a city in the United States, and the media picks this up and they decide to have their first integrated prom to look good, let's be honest here. And it all, I think if you know anything about Carrie, you kind of have an idea of what happens here, but it's so fantastically done, which doesn't surprise me. Nobody writes a twist or social commentary in such a way, the same way as Tiffany D. Jackson does. I just think she is a genius. And there's also a podcast element to this. I read an e-arc, so I didn't listen to the audiobook, but I have a feeling the audiobook is probably fantastic because we get chapters of these podcasters looking back. They're set in the present, looking back to 2014 and what happened here, and making theories about how this all played out and what's happening and all that kind of stuff. I bet you on audio it's fantastic. So I will probably listen to that one day, but of course Tiffany D. Jackson had to be on this. It's amazing. I don't think she'll be on my list next year because I'm pretty sure I watched an interview with her and she said she has nothing coming out next year and she just is taking a break, which good for her, but sad for me. So let me find the quote that I have for this one. It says, "Become so drunk on life and love that it blinds you to the hate threatening to drown you. Chew on grief for breakfast, devour aches for lunch. Inhale life's acid, let it burn the costume he has forced upon you." Oh, so good. Yeah, I'm tempted to reread that right now. And then of course I have to have a Tea Kingfisher on here. So in 7th I have A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. I could have made this whole list Tea Kingfisher, to be honest with you. I think I've read 7 of her books this year and really loved 6 of them. So I debated which one to put on. Should I do Nettle and Bone because it's the one that made me fall in love with her? Should I do What Moves the Dead because it's like one of my favorite horrors ever? But in my heart of hearts, I know that A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking is my favorite book of hers. If you're into this cozy fantasy thing that's having a moment right now, you have to read this one. It is so sweet, but there's also some stakes here. We are following a young girl, I think she's 13 or 14, who has magic, and she's kind of hiding that, but she uses her magic just in baking. That is what her magic is good for. She has like a companion that is a sourdough starter named Bob, and he's a bit cranky, which is hilarious. And she wakes up one morning and there's a dead body in the bakery and she's being accused of it. Then it sets her off on this whole adventure. She builds a gingerbread man army, and I know this sounds ridiculous, and in a way it is ridiculous, but it's really well done. It's Tea Kingfisher, trust me. It's so fantastically done. There's some great commentary on that trope of why is it always like teenagers saving the world. She makes comments about that, about how the adults are really lacking awareness and putting so much pressure on her, and why didn't the adults step up when they had a chance. So I appreciated all that commentary. Loved all the sidekicks in here. Loved our main character, loved the writing. Let me read you the quote. It says, "You expect heroes to survive terrible things. If you give them a medal, then you don't ever have to ask why the terrible thing happened in the first place or try to fix it." So as I said, there's some great commentary in here, and yeah, so that is my favorite Tea Kingfisher so far. I do plan to read more of her backlist in 2023, but that's going to be a hard one to top. Nobody's more surprised than me that this book is on my list at number 6 because I hated Uprooted as much as I did, except I did like the writing. And I went to my friends and asked, I need some books that have wintry settings, cold settings. That's what I was in the mood for. And everybody said Spinning Silver, knowing I didn't like Uprooted. And I think Patrick also says he hated Uprooted, but this is one of his favorite books, so I just trusted everybody and went for it, and I'm so glad that I did because I fell in love with this. I knew I liked Naomi Novik's writing. Did I say what this book is? Spinning Silver? Yeah, it's so good. I was just so excited, I forgot. And I just thought that the writing was beautiful, super atmospheric. As I said, I'm really all about the vibes at the moment, and that has had great vibes, and we're following a main character whose father is a debt collector, but he's terrible at it, and his family is suffering because of it, and the daughter really steps up and starts threatening people to pay their debts back, and it makes her parents upset, but really they were suffering. Her mom was really ill, and she gets this reputation, and it goes to the fairies that maybe she is turning silver into gold, and it all unravels from there. We follow different characters that she is connected with as well, and it's really just about survival, about complicated relationships with your families, particularly your father, and I just love to see how they all came together. These are very strong women forced into unthinkable circumstances, and I appreciated all the perspectives, which is rare for me. I don't know how I felt about the romance. I will say that was my one little gripe with it. I wasn't into that as much, but everything else was so fantastic that it didn't bother me too much. And yeah, people say this is, if you look up on Google, books with wintry settings, this is #1 all the time, and for a good reason. It's perfect for that. And the quote that I chose is, "But the world I wanted wasn't the world I lived in. And if I would do nothing until I could repair every terrible thing at once, I would do nothing forever." So, really great book. And then the next one is another one that I don't own, but it's so fantastic, and I do want a copy because I love this cover. This is Siren Queen by Nevo. This, again, is about the vibes and the atmosphere. It is set in pre-code Hollywood, so Hollywood in the 1930s, with some magical realism. So like I said about the Golem and the Ginny, this is the vibe I like historical, there's some romance in here, with a touch of magical realism fantasy. And this is perfect for that. I don't think this is going to be for everybody. In fact, I know it's not for everybody because I see mixed reviews for it, and I get it because it's kind of confusing. We're following a character named Lily Wei, who is probably my favorite character of the year, and she is determined to become famous, but she's not going to make the sacrifices that women are expected to make to become famous. And in this world, it's literal sacrifices. You cut off inches of your hair, which means years of your life. It's a whole convoluted thing. It makes sense in the context of the book, but she's not willing to become submissive. She is willing to turn into a monster to become famous, and I thought she was incredible. And this is also sapphic. We do get some like sapphic steamy scenes in here, and I just loved the whole vibe of it. I love Nevo's writing, and I understand the mixed reviews, but for me it was perfect. And the quote that I chose is, "She was clever and determined. I could sit in her tigers, in the life she has built so far away from everything either of us had ever known. I needed a silver screen to give me a dream, but she had painted her own out of nothing at all." So good. The last 4 books are books that I do own physical copies of, and the next one is the other romance on this list. And when I read this book, I knew it was going to be divisive, and it has proven to be. It is not for everyone, but this is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. And maybe I'm a bit biased here because I just adore Akwaeke Emezi. I have loved everything they've ever written. I would read anything that they write. I appreciate that they write in so many genres. This was their first romance. This is an absolute mess. Faye, our main character, has lost her husband and is grieving. It's 5 years later, and she's still deep in her grief, and we all deal with the grief differently. And it's one of these things, like, it's a mess, and I don't want to, how do you explain this one without spoiling it? I didn't know what to expect going into this one. I didn't know where the romance was going, who she was going to have a romance with. It caught me completely off guard, but I loved it, and people are going to hate it. So that's the problem with this. So I don't know how to sell this one. It's just, I loved it. I love their writing. It's not your typical romance, I would say, but I still classify it as a romance. The author classifies it as a romance. It has like the HEA and everything that you would think a romance would have. It's just kind of a mess to get there, and Faye is not going to be a character for everyone. You're not always going to like the choices she makes. I understood the choices that she made, and the way that people just connect, how you can connect through grief, and yeah, it's just a mess. But I loved it. I loved her best friend Joy as well. I kind of want Joy to have her own book because that would be pretty awesome, and Joy has her own messy romances that she goes through and you hear about, so I think that would be fun. But yeah, I just I just love this so much, but it's one of those ones I'm scared to recommend. I don't even know how to sell it to you, as you can see, because I don't want to spoil it. So yeah, this was the perfect book for me, not the perfect book for everyone, but I just love A Quickie and Mezzy. And the quote is, "It was like a fork in the road had closed, shut off by an avalanche of grief, choked with rocks and a broken heart. It wasn't supposed to open, and honestly, it still hadn't. But somehow an entirely new path had formed, green and creeping." So I just love the writing in there. I just think that A Quickie and Mezzy is so talented. This is the second year in a row that a book from CJ Cook has ended up on my best books of the year list. So I think that solidifies her as an auto by author for me. I still need to read her debut. I think it's her debut, The Nesting. So maybe if I read that in 2023, that'll be on my best books of 2023. There's just something about, again, her writing, and it's a good reminder of how much I like gothic horror. This is my thing. I like slow burn. I like atmosphere. I don't like a lot of action scenes or anything too supernatural. I do like that sometimes, but it's not going to be a favorite. It's not going to be something that really gets under my skin and I continue to think about. And that is what CJ Cook does for me. That is what The Ghost Woods did for me. And it's so shocking and a shame that this has under 1,000 ratings on Goodreads. The Lighthouse Witches, which is her book that came out last year, the one that was on my list last year, got more attention and love. This one kind of just slipped through the cracks, and I don't know why, because I actually think this is a better book. And this is following two women told in different timelines, but the timelines are only like 5 years apart. They both find themselves in this home for unwed mothers. This is set in the 50s and 60s, I believe. So you can imagine what that is like for them to be pregnant and unwed at that time and sent to this home. And maybe everything at this home is not quite right. Maybe there's something darker going on here. There might be some supernatural stuff here. You don't know. So it's just creepy in that way. The tension that is built. I just thought the commentary on motherhood was fantastic. The commentary on queerness was amazing. And there were a lot of great surprises and twists. And here I never truly knew what to expect. But it's just truly solidified that CJ Cook, I think, is brilliant. I will read everything she writes. I don't own The Nesting, but I need to get my hands on a copy of that. And though tonally it's very similar to The Lighthouse Witches, the story is completely different. But you could tell it's still CJ Cook. I just love that about her stuff so much. And I hope that a few people pick this up. This needs to get over 1,000 ratings on Goodreads. It just deserves it. And I'm just going to read you the opening lines of this book because I think it captures it perfectly, just the weirdness of it. It says, "I have a ghost in my knee. There's a small pocket just behind the kneecap and she's hiding in there, all tucked up in the soft mattresses of cartilage. She is very small and terrified, so I'm sitting with that leg straightened so I don't disturb her. I've not said a word about this to anyone. They think I'm mad." So yeah, it's a little out there and it's just perfect for me. I just loved every second of it. Okay, my top two, and I find them very similar, so I need more books like this. In second place, I have Twinkle by Min Jin Lee. Look at these tabs. These are not nice tabs. This was before I color coded my tabs, but there are so many. I should probably go through and switch them out, but I thought this was brilliant. I've had this on my shelves since it came out. Never read it because I knew it would be a favorite, and I was right, but why did I save it? And this is a multi-generational family saga, which are buzzwords for me, but I don't pick them up enough. So if you have any recommendations for historical fiction books that take place over decades and we're following a family throughout the generations, please let me know because I just love that. And this is following a Korean family, and it really starts with our main character Sunja, who everybody's kind of tied throughout the story. So even though it follows many years, it's all about their connection, the people's connection to this one character, and I thought that was masterfully done. And she ends up pregnant and has to go from Korea to Japan. And I wasn't really aware about how Korean people were treated in Japan at this time, but you really get into that. It is harrowing, it is dark. I was on the Google, I learned a lot. So I appreciate historical fiction that does that. And these characters, I felt them so deeply. I got emotional. I read a lot of this through tears. It's a bigger book, but I couldn't put it down. It's just, I like a slow burn historical fiction. I just do, and I don't read them enough because they take longer. They're harder to recommend because I know it's not for everybody, but I just think this is one I would recommend to most people and I would feel confident in, because I just think it's that brilliant, even if it's not your typical genre. So I cried. I need to watch the show. I watched the first episode and thought it was really well done, but I need to sit down and actually get through it all. I think it's on Apple TV, so I have to do that. But yeah, I just loved it. I'm so glad that I finally read this. And the quote is, "You want to see a very bad man? Make an ordinary man successful beyond his imagination. Let's see how good he is when he can do whatever he wants." And last, my favorite book of the year, this one really snuck up on me, but I shouldn't have been surprised, is Still Life by Sarah Winman. Sarah Winman wrote Tin Man, which is a completely different book, much smaller than this, but is one of my favorite books of all time. So I shouldn't have been surprised that I fell in love with this one, but it really, like, I fell in love with this. I read this, I think, in August and September, like sometime around there, and it just, I still think about it. These characters are in my heart. I just loved it. It is, again, like, this is not a family saga, it's a found family saga, I would say, but it does take place over generations. It takes place in Italy right after World War II up until the 1980s. So we're going a long time span here, and our main character, Ulysses, is English, so we follow him after the war. When he goes back to England, he's in this pub. All the characters from the pub are big parts of the story, like a woman that he's in love with who's not really in love with him, her daughter, the pub owner, different patrons of the pub. They're all big parts of this story. And while Ulysses was in the war, he met a woman. Is her name Evelyn? I should know this. Yes, Evelyn, who was an older woman, and they had an encounter where they found like a really important piece of art. So we get a lot of discussions about the importance of art in here, which is something I always appreciate. There's something about art and books that works for me, so we get those conversations. And then we're following both of them, but mostly Ulysses, over decades of where they don't see each other again, and eventually they come back together again, and just the bond that they have, the friendship that they have formed, and they just knew in the moment they met that there was something special there. But we follow Ulysses in England, coming back to Italy because of an encounter he had during the war, not with Evelyn, with somebody else, and it's just beautiful. I learned a lot about Italy at that time that I didn't realize, the great floods that happened during there. That's a big part of this story, and just him interacting with different characters. I don't want to say too much because it gives away a lot of the plot, though there's not much of a plot. This is 100% character driven. If that is not you, skip this one. I know this is not a book for everyone, but it's my perfect book, and I'm tempted to reread it right now. I just thought that this was gorgeous. I love these characters so much. Sarah Winman, again, an auto-buy author for me. This did get a lot of attention when it first came out, I think in the UK, but I don't see people talk about it as much now. But if you like historical fiction that takes place over many years, you like the found family trope, you like character-driven novels, you like beautiful writing, this is it. This is a huge winner for me. My best book of the year, one of my all-time favorites. As you can see, I have space on my shelves right now, and I want to make an all-time favorite shelf, and this will be on there for sure. I just thought this was incredible. And then the last quote to wrap this video up is, "We like beauty, don't we? Something good on the eye cheers us, does something to us on a cellular level, makes us feel alive and enriched. Beautiful art opens our eyes to the beauty of the world, Ulysses. It repositions our sight and judgment, captures forever that which is fleeting, a meager stain in the corridors of history. That's all we are, a little mark of scuff." Gorgeous. So those are my top 12 books with a couple honorable mentions. I had to sneak those in there somehow. I would love to know what the best book you read this year was. If you read any of these, I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions on them. I know they're not all beloved, but I love them so much. I cannot wait to see what 2023 brings. Thank you all for your support throughout this year. I think this is gonna be my last video of 2022, which is just wild to me. You've all been incredible. Thank you to all of my team stockings, because the reindeer readathon is going to wrap up soon. I have had so much fun this month. I appreciate you all so much. Thanks for your support. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.